Now, we had learned chapter 22, so I'm going to do it very quickly. I'm not even going to read it in Hebrew because we did chapter 22 3 weeks ago. And in order for you to maximally appreciate all the commentary I hope to bring in today, you'd want to be refreshed on the storyline. So we're going to do chapter 22 again. And it was a tragic chapter. It's the chapter where King Saul, trying to catch up with David, ends up following him to the city of the Kohanim, the Kohanes, the priests. And you'll remember that, well, let's refresh our memories of this chapter. Here we go. 1 Samuel, Shmuel Aleph, chapter 22, Perchaf Bet. David departed and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brothers and all his father's house heard, they joined him down there. He's on the run. He's fleeing from Saul. Saul, King Shaul, is absolutely determined to kill him. He wants to kill him because he's convinced that David is the one who's been anointed to be the next king. He does not suspect that David is going to speed up Saul's death. He does not suspect any disloyalty by David. But King Saul wants his son Jonathan, to be the next king. And he knows that as long as David is alive, David, then Jonathan never will be king. So Shaul wants to kill David. And he's pursuing with his own personal, royal army. And David is on the run for his life. David, again, has done nothing wrong to Saul. He's been loyal. He's married to Saul's daughter, Michal, plays the harp for him, killed Goliath at the request of Saul. But Hamelech Shaul, King Saul, unfortunately has this despondency. Is it a clinical depression? I leave it to you to, it might be. God took away something from him and left him with an evil spirit, it says, a ruach ra. And David's on the run for his life. He gets word to his family, you may not see me for a long time. I'm wanted, dead or alive. And the family joins up with him where he's hiding at Adullam. Now, David was alone with his family. And by God's miracle, David rapidly assembled an army of 400 men. Basically, people down on their luck. This is what happened in a lot of societies in the Middle Ages, in the ancient times. Who made up armies? Basically, people who could not otherwise support their families, or adventurers would hear that if you join the king's army, or any army, the pay is good, you'll get solid meals and a place to sleep, or you'll have the camaraderie of other people like you. And if you succeed in battle, you'll be able to take spoils. And this attracted people to armies. This is where a lot of these kings got their armies. Everyone who was in dire straits, everyone who was in debt, everyone who was desperate, joined him, and he became their leader. Yes, it would be nice if he had the cream of the crop of the people of Israel. That wasn't going to happen. He's running for his life from the king. The miracle is that anybody was willing to join him, but it was an adventure and a chance to be paid. There were about 400 men with him. Ke'arba me'ot ish. David went from there to Mitzpeh of Moab. And he said to the king of Moab, let my father and mother come and stay with you until I know what God will do for me. Let's refresh our memories as to the map. We'll come back to this in a second. Here we go. So here's the kingdom, here's Israel. Later on, when we get into 2 Kings, Malachim Bet, that's a long time from now, because now we're in 1 Samuel. We still have 2 Samuel and 1 Kings. There will be a civil war, and this wonderful country of Israel will divide in half. There will be a civil war, and there'll be a northern kingdom of Israel. That's what it'll be known as, the kingdom of Israel. And the south will be known as kingdom of Yehuda, Judea. and their capital is Samaria, Shomron, and their capital is going to be Yerushalayim. But right now it's one country. Saul is the king, Shaul, and David is fleeing for his life. If he goes this a ways, he's in the land of the Philistines where he's wanted dead or alive. He killed Goliath, their hero. So he goes that a ways to the kingdom of Moab, right? There's Moab, there's the Philistines, the Gaza Strip goes to Moab. Okay. So he goes to Moab and says to the king of Moab, let my father and mother come and stay with you until I know what God will do for me. That is to say, I, David, have an army of 400 people. I've got my agenda. My parents, I don't want my brothers in my army. They need a place for sanctuary because the king will end up Saul will end up killing them, God forbid, taking them hostage. So I'm asking that you give them sanctuary. So we led them to the king of Moab, and they stayed with him as long as David remained in the stronghold. But the prophet Gad, it's G-A-D, it's a Hebrew name, Gad. The prophet Gad, now you'll say it sounds like God. Well, they didn't speak English in the Bible. So it's not like, well, gee, that name sounds awfully like, no, the name God comes from way later. And the word God, word derivation comes from the word good. That's where it comes from in English. Anyway, the prophet God said to David, do not stay in the stronghold. Go at once to the territory of Judea, Eretz Yehudah. So he went to that forest. So he has set himself up. He's got his family safe in Moab. And now he's told, go back across to Judah, which is just like get across the water. Saul heard that David and his men had been spotted in Judah. Saul then was in Gibeah, and he had a spear, and he had his army, Avadav Nitzav Imalav, and he said to his men, and his men are the men of Benjamin. Remember, he's from the tribe. There are 12 tribes, technically 13 if you count Manasseh and Ephraim, the two offshoots of Yosef, as separate tribes. He says to men of his own tribe, you're my people. You're my people. In a way, I compare it to Robert E. Lee at the time of the American Civil War. So the American Civil War, the South, the Confederacy, tried to split away from the North, the Union. So in most Americans' minds, the ones who even know there was a Civil War, most kids today, they don't know what's going on. But even college graduates from the Ivy League, they barely know what's going on in history. But for those of us who know about the Civil War, we normally think of the North and the South. But actually within the South, each state had its own army and its own particular loyalties. And so there was Alabama and there was Mississippi. Each one, it was like a thing, I fight for Mississippi. I'm not fighting with Alabama. We're in this together, and we'll keep in mind one of the big things in the American Civil War was states' rights. They fought over two issues. They want to have their slaves, and because of the economy with your cotton and everything, and they want the federal government, beyond the issue of slavery, they want the federal government to leave them alone. And there are a lot of people today also, by the way. It's just you can't say states' rights because it sounds like you're a racist with the Confederacy. But the reality is, if you ever have felt that the federal government's bothering you and you wish they'd get out of your life, well, that's what the South was angry about. All right. Of all the different states in the South that were fighting, Virginia was a unique animal. And Virginia had its own army, and General Robert E. Lee was the head of that army, the Army of the Republic of Virginia. And Virginia was the most central part of the Confederacy. So anyway, why do I mention that? Because in the same way, what you have here is that Saul, just as, let's say, Robert E. Lee was loyal to Virginia, more than he was loyal to the Confederacy, he was loyal to Virginia. which happened to mean he was loyal to the Confederacy. The people of Virginia, one more word, because we're back to Benjamin. The people of Virginia, a lot of us don't realize it. A lot of the Civil War was because the people of Virginia were angry. It was about it was about slavery, it was about civil rights, but there was a very big issue going on. A lot of us don't realize, even those of us that know a little bit more about American history, don't realize first president of the United States, George Washington, was from Virginia. Second was Adams from Massachusetts. Third was Thomas Jefferson from Virginia. Fourth was James Madison from Virginia. Fifth was James Monroe from Virginia. In fact, 6 of the first 10 presidents were from Virginia. William Henry Harrison, John Tyler. And if you take out the just Adams and Adams, it was like, other than the Adamses, it was like 6 out of 8. Everything was Virginia. Virginia felt we are at the center of this country. That's why, as soon as the yellow fever plague broke out in Philadelphia, which is where the first capital was, they looked at each other and said, this is our opportunity. Let's move the capital to Virginia. It initially had been in Philadelphia because that was kind of centrally located for the colonies. But let's move it to Virginia. And Washington, D.C. is actually carved out of a little corner of Virginia. That way, Madison, they didn't have cars in those days and trains and buses. And so that way, Madison, Monroe, Jefferson, they could get to the White House and back to Monticello, and everything was nice and easy. So it's a concept that you're loyal to your own state, no less than to your people. So Saul, King Saul of Benjamin, he felt, hey, I'm the king of this whole country. I expect everybody's loyalty, but I especially expect loyalty from Benjamin. If you're a Benjaminite, I mean, I don't know what I can count on from the Issacharites, Issachar and Zvulun and Yosef, but I expect, at least for goodness sakes, Benjamin. Saul said, listen, men of Benjamin. He wouldn't call David by his name anymore. He hated him so much, he wouldn't even call him David. He constantly would only call him son of Jesse. Will the son of Jesse, will the Ben Yishai, let's see if I have it in Hebrew. Ben Yishai, called him Ben Yishai. Won't call him son, he's calling him son of Jesse. Well, son of Jesse, what's he doing? Is he buying you off? Is he giving fields and vineyards to all of you? Has he offered you like generalships and to be generals and corporals and lieutenants in an army of his, captains of thousands? Where's your loyalty? Is that why all of you, even from Benjamin, have conspired against me? No one ever tells me. When my own son made a pact with the son of Jesse, no one told me. No one's concerned for me. No one cares about me. No one informs me when my own son has sent my servant in ambush against me. What's going on here? Will someone tell me where David is? Let's go get him and kill him. Doeg, the Edomite, who was standing among them and was simply like a servant, I saw the son of Jesse come to Achimelech, son of Achitub, like the head Kohen at the Kohen city of Nov, the city of the priests, the city of the Kohens. I saw him in the city of, and do you remember what happened? I don't want to go back and do chapter 21 again. Do you remember? The Kohen, he greeted him, and when David said, I have no food, he gave him bread, and he said, I have no weapon. He said, look, we don't have weapons. We're peaceful priests, we're peaceful Kohanim, but we do have the sword that was used by you, as a matter of fact, in killing Goliath. In like a museum, in a showcase, I'll give you the sword. So he gave him a sword, and he gave him food. And it also said, by the way, if I could find it really, really fast, and I'm at 22:9. Let me see if I can find it really, really fast. And if I don't, I won't. But he also inquired of God on behalf of David. Let's see if I could find it really, really fast. Otherwise, I'll just move forward. 1, 2, 3. Soda. No. Okay. Not finding it real fast. I'll find it after class. I'll see it 1, 2, 3. But anyway, David asked of the Kohen, I'd like to inquire of God. And the Kohen used his Urim and Tumim. The Kohen's breastplate with the 12 jewels, and he spoke to God and he inquired on David's behalf. Let's get back to the text here. So he says, what's going on here? And Doeg says, I saw the son of Jesse with the Kohanim, the Kohanes of the city of Nov, and he inquired of the Lord on his behalf. That is, the Kohen, not only greeted him as a good guy, though I know, King, you regard him as a traitor, but he even inquired of God Almighty using the special Urim and Tumim of the Kohen, the high priest, which was like I'm going to use the word magical, not magic like the magic castle, but like an extraordinary way that the Kohen Gadol was able to communicate with God. He could ask God yes or no questions and get an answer, and he did that on behalf of David. So Doeg says he inquired of the Lord on his behalf. He gave him bread, gave him provisions. He even gave him the sword of Goliath. The king blew up. So the king sent for the priest, the Kohen Achimelech, and for all the Kohanim, all the priests. They all came to the king. And the king said, listen to me, son of Achitub. Now he's not calling Achimelech by his first name either. Listen to me, son of Achitub. Yes, my lord. Shaul said to him, why have you and the son of Jesse conspired against me? You gave him food and a sword and inquired of God for him? What, that he may rise in ambush against me? Achimelech replied to the king, but who is there among all your servants as trusted as David? He's your son-in-law. He's obedient to your bidding. I wasn't helping an enemy of yours. I was helping your closest ally. This is the first time I inquired of God for him. I haven't done anything wrong. Please don't let your royal highness find fault with me, with a servant, or with any of my father's house. For your servant, me, I knew nothing. Well, I didn't know you got a problem with him. King said, you shall die, Achimelech. Now he calls him by his first name, pronouncing a death sentence. You and all your father's house. And the king commanded the guards standing by, turn about and kill all the Kohanim of the Lord, all the priests, for they are in league with David. They knew he was running away, and they did not inform me. And it's just completely wrong. But the king's servants would not raise a hand to strike down the Kohanim, the priests of God. Nobody would do it. So the same Doeg, king said to Doeg, you go and strike him down. And Doeg went and struck down the priests. He killed 85 Kohanim who wore the linen ephod, nosei ephod bad. In other words, who wore the Kohen's garments. He put the city of Nov, the Kohen city, the town of the priests, to the sword, killing out the whole city. Men and women, children and infants, oxen, asses, and sheep, all to the sword. He literally obliterated the entire city. There was only one survivor. One son of Achimelech escaped. His name was Eviatar. Eviatar, let's see if we find the name there. Oh, there we are. His name was Eviatar. And he fled to David. When Eviatar told David that Shaul had killed the priests, the Kohanim, David said, Eviatar, this is on me. This is on me. I knew that day when Doeg the Edomite was there that he would tell Shaul, I'm to blame for all the deaths in your father's house. Stay with me. Do not fear. Whoever ever in your lifetime tries to kill you will have to get past me first. It will be my care. I take this on for life to guard you. So that's chapter 22. Now, you've just gotten, I'm not saying this to brag on myself, I'm not at all, but you've just gotten a very rich coverage of chapter 22 in its main text. Again, I'm not saying that it's rich because I taught it. It's rich because that's the text and I shared it with you. I want to show you now how much more richness there is in Jewish tradition over and beyond the basic text. So I've prepared a number of sources, and let's see what we can pick up here. Let's start with the Midrash. This is Midrash Tehillim 34. Here we go. Oh, one more thing. Always one more thing, like Lieutenant Columbo. You may recall, right before what I just read you in chapter 22, that David had been protecting his life. Temporarily, he fled to the land of the Philistines. We learned this together. He had fled to the land of the Philistines to get away from the sovereignty of King Saul. So he had to actually leave the country. Before he went to Moab in the east, which is where we are now, which is where his father, his brothers are, that's where his family is, under the protection of the king of Moab. Before that happened, previously he had fled to the land of the Philistines in Gaza, where he encountered that king. And if you remember, after a short amount of time, they spotted him. Holy smokes, that's the guy that killed Goliath. We want him dead or alive. So they took him and brought him to the king. Do you remember? And he had to think quickly, because they're going to kill me. And if you recall, he started to feign madness. He started like salivating on himself, having saliva drip onto his beard and acting crazy. And like really demonstratively, like someone mentally ill, like if you see, like if you can imagine, the drug addicts on the streets of San Francisco, what that looks like. So David was acting truly mentally ill, if you recall. And when they brought him before the king took one look at him, and instead of deciding, I will have this guy executed for what he did to our champion Goliath, he took one look at him, and the king said, get him out of here. It's my misfortune to be the king of a country of mentally ill crazies. I don't need another one from the Jews now. This is what you're bringing me get him out of here. I don't need more crazies. And so there's actually a psalm. I believe it's Psalm 34. It is Psalm 34. LeDavid b'shanoto tamol lifnei Avimelech vayagoshehu vayalach. A psalm of David when he feigned madness. When I say feigned, that's F-E-I-G-N-E-D. When he acted, made believe he's mentally ill, crazy, salivating on himself. It's a psalm. How God saved David's life by giving him that idea. David ascribed the idea not to his genius, his cleverness, but to God giving him that idea. So back to the Midrash. The Midrash tells us, Midrash Tehillim, it says, Kol ma she'asa heikuf berhei HaKadosh Baruch Hu ba'olamo yafeh asa. Everything that God created in his world, our earth, our greater universe, everything God created is meant to be, is perfect for what it is meant to be. So if there's something you don't like, it's meant to be that way. It's meant for a reason. I'll give you an example. Maybe you don't like freezing cold winter weather. I learned, not in school, no one taught me, but I learned later on through reading and through another thing, that if it wouldn't be for the freezing cold winter, our entire globe would be overrun by ants. Who knew? Who knew? Did you ever think that? When it's snowing and it's freezing and it's ice, not in California, but elsewhere, well, in California, sometimes it gets freezing also. It's like 48 degrees, sometimes like 45 in the winter. It's terrible. But if you're like in other parts like Fargo, where it gets minus 45. So, what's that all about if God made a perfect world? Turned out my daughter Kinneret, one of my children, spent one term of college in southern Arizona. She was a student at Barnard College, and Columbia University owns, or at least at that time, they owned the biosphere in southern Arizona as part of their geography department. And they had students could be eligible to spend one term in the biosphere as part of geoclimate experiments. And so she learned a lot about the biosphere is that thing with the big dome, and they create like a man-made, human-made planet where they planted enough trees in the forest biome to give off enough oxygen so that you don't need outside oxygen. And then people expire the respiration carbon dioxide, and that helps the trees, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a whole long story. So among the lectures that she attended, she found out they created all these genius professors. I'm not using the word genius sarcastically, I mean it. All these geniuses in climate, whatever, created a perfect world. And right away, they started finding out things didn't work out according to the scientific models. First of all, no matter what they did, no matter how many trees they put in, they never could get enough oxygen. But they had put out press releases to the media, and there was reports all over the media that it provided enough oxygen. And Kinneret told me there was this lecture where they explained that every night they secretly, after midnight, pump in some oxygen from outside. And nobody's ever allowed to tell anybody. They all have to take like a pledge. No one's allowed to tell anybody. And how I found out from Kinneret is a secret that I'm not allowed to tell. And I don't tell things I'm not supposed to tell. So anyway, they pumped in oxygen. Another thing they learned is that they got overrun by ants. They had created a summer, a hot climate. They created under this one gigantic dome that had a winter biome and an ocean biome, a desert biome. They didn't have winter. No one thought of creating, like, why would you want to create a freezing, like a segment of the place where people are too cold? And they found out without a winter, you cannot control ants. Well, you could say, well, can't you spray them? Well, that's the whole point. The whole idea of the biome is we're not going to bring in artificial things. So it turns out everything God made is for a purpose. Everything. And by the way, the winter allows the land to rest. You don't plant it in the winter. Before people gained agricultural science knowledge, and they didn't know about different crops and alternating, rotating crops, the winter is a tremendous blessing for the earth. There's a lot of stuff. I don't want to get too far afield. Here's where I'm coming with. So the Midrash says, everything God created, Yafeh Asa, was perfect for what its purpose was. Amar David Lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Well, one time, it's not in the text of the Bible. It's only in the Midrash. David, earlier, before the period that we're up to now, once had a conversation with God. And he said, Kol ma she'asita yafa, everything that you created is perfect for what it's supposed to be. V'hachachma yafa min hakol, yafeh min hakol. And wisdom is the single best thing of everything perfect that you created, that you gave humanity the capacity for wisdom. So I have a question, God, he says. And he cites something. So he says, Avol hashtut shebarata, mahana yesh lefanecha. So I have a problem, God. Given that everything in the world you created is perfect for what it's supposed to be, and nothing is more perfect than wisdom, how in the world is it that, as among humanity, I see examples of mentally ill people, idiots? I don't mean like idiot like when you're talking about someone. I mean like really mentally ill people. Hashtut, shoteh. What's the value? Why did you create mental illness? When a person walks in a public marketplace, and he's there tearing his clothing up, and little children run after him and make fun of him, and the common people mock him and laugh at him. This is good. You wanted this, God. Why would you create such a phenomenon as mental illness? Omar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God responded, David, al hashtut ata koreh tagar, regarding this mental illness about which you are complaining, chayecha shetitztarech lo, in your lifetime, you will find that mental illness, its phenomenon, will save your life. And so what ended up happening? That's the story that we just learned about, how when he was before the king, he saved his life by feigning mental illness. If there had not been such a phenomenon, the king would have said, stop the act. So that's one midrash. The midrash goes on. I'll just tell you very briefly. He complained about two things. He asked God, why did you create mental illness? And why did you create spiders? I don't get it. Like, I get everything. I get ants. I don't get spiders. God said later in that midrash, future in your life, an experience will come up and you will find that a spider will save your life. So something to think about. Next midrash I bring for you is from Bamidbar Rabbah 14. So here's what happened. This is not in the story that we read. This is beyond the story. It says that King David, why did he go to war later on in 2 Samuel? In 2 Samuel, let me take you here. In 2 Samuel, he goes to war against Moab. That's the Roman numeral 2. Shmuel Bet, Perek Chet, chapter 8, Pasuk Bet, verse 2. It says in a later, this is coming up later, we're in 1 Samuel, chapter 22. So it's coming up a little bit later. It is a spoiler. He's going to become king of Israel. Saul is not going to succeed in killing him. I'm sorry for giving it away. I should have told you, spoiler alert, you could have turned off the sound. He's going to be king, and in a war, Vayach et Moav, Vayamadedem b'chevel hashkem otam arza vayamaded shnei chavalim lahamit umalo chachevel achayot vatihi Moav leDavid lavadim noseh minicha. He defeats Moab. He makes them lie down on the ground, measures them off with a cord, measures out 2 lengths of cord for those who were to be put to death and 1 length for those to be spared. And the Moabites become his vassals. So the Midrash knows this. You don't know it because you haven't studied it yet with me. But the Midrash knows that eventually he's going to go to war with Moab. So the Midrash asks, what kind of ingratitude is that? When he was running for his life, fleeing from Saul, and he came to Moab for sanctuary, and the king of Moab said, you can stay here and I'll even grant sanctuary to your family. And then the prophet God, as we learned tonight, told him it's time to leave Moab and go back to Judea. So why does he later go? What ingratitude that he goes to war against Moab? The Midrash here tells us in Bamidbar Rabbah 14, tells us that When David fled from Saul, Holich aviv imo el melech Moav. He brought his father and mother with him to the king of Moab. Because he feared Saul was going to try to kill him and perhaps his parents too, or take them hostage. And why did he entrust Moab with his parents' safety and his own? Because he thought and expected maybe the Moabites will be kind to me because I'm actually a descendant of Moab. Let's take a look. David, in the book of Ruth, so that's later Bible, but it's actually precedes David. At the end of the book of Ruth, we learn that she had a baby with Boaz. It's a long story. I won't go through all of that now. We'll lose time. But the baby was named Oved. And so Ruth is the mother of Oved. And he was the father of Jesse, Yishai. Ruth was the grandmother of Yishai, father of David. Ruth was the great-grandmother of King David. So since she was the great-grandmother of King David, he thought and hoped that the Moabites would treat him well, as kind of like a favored son, because what ended up happening was, if you'll recall, that Elimelech had fled Judea in the beginning of the book of Ruth with his wife and 2 sons, and they went to the country of Moab. And in Moab, each son married a Moabite woman, one of whom was Ruth. So what ended up happening, if you recall, they married Moabite women. One was named Orpah and the other Ruth. In other words, David was the great-grandson, was the great-grandson of a Moabite. He had Moabite blood, so to speak. Therefore, he brought his family for sanctuary with Moab. All the more reason now to ask, so why then did he kill them later on? He put his faith in them. Well, the text tells us in 1 Samuel chapter 22, we learned it tonight again, Vayelech David Misham, Mitzpeh Moav. Vayomer El Melech Moav Yetzena Aviva Imi Etchem Asher Eda Eseli Elokim. David came to Moab. He had sanctuary protection together with his parents, etc., etc. And the text said, and the text tells us, and the family lived peacefully in Moab all the years that David was in Moab. No. And what about when he left Moab? Haragam melech Moab v'lo nimlat mehem ela ach echad leDavid. After David departed from Moab with his 400 soldiers at the behest of the prophet Gad to come back to Judea, the king of Moab killed David's family. He killed the father, he killed the mother, everybody from David's family. He killed out the whole family except for one single brother of David's, Shebarach Eitzel Nachash Melech Bnei Ammon, who fled for his life to live under the safe protection of King Nachash of Ammon, the Ammonite. Let's remind ourselves of the map. So David had fled to Moab. There his parents were kept safe. David went back to Jerusalem. His parents were in Moab. And when the king of Moab killed his family, the one surviving brother fled up here to Ammon. And that is the reason later David had a score to settle with the people of Moab. So we pick up that from that Midrash. Next Midrash. In Midrash Tehillim, we learn a little bit more about why Shaul was so angry that the Kohanim, that Achimelech the high Kohen, had inquired of God the Urim and Tumim on behalf of David. Aleph Lamed, Amar le Asa leDavid Melech b'chayecha. What happened is that Saul accused the king, the high Kohen, of treating David like a king. Lefisha ein nishalin betumim v'urim. You're not supposed to inquire. The high Kohen is never allowed to inquire of Urim and Tumim, to inquire directly of God. Ella lemelech lebeitin lemishat sorach tzibur bo. There are only three types of people for whom the Kohen Gadol, the high Kohen, ever is allowed to inquire directly of God through the Urim and Tumim. He's only allowed to ask on behalf of the king of Israel. That would be Saul. And certainly not yet David. Ula Beitin, and for the high court of the people of Israel, he would be allowed to inquire, Ula Mishat Sorach Siburbo, and for someone for whom the Jewish nation is desperately reliant on, someone, let's say, the general of an army at a time that there's no king and there's no one else, someone of that stature. David was not yet of that stature, it would seem. So Saul is saying, I understand from Doeg, you inquired of God on behalf of David through the Urim and Tumim. That's only done for a king. That's part of why Saul accused the Kohen Gadol of being in rebellion. You treated David not just courteously, not just as my ally or my son-in-law, you treated him as though he already is the king. V'David nishal ba'orim v'tumim. You asked in the Urim and Tumim on behalf of David. V'cheven she'amar lo et hadavar nichnas libo ruach kinah. When Saul heard from Doeg that the high Kohen had inquired of the Urim and Tumim on behalf of David, an extreme fit of jealousy took hold of King Saul. When the high priest, when Kohen Gadol, Achimelech, saw how unbelievably furious Saul was and that it did not bode well, he tried his best to explain, I don't understand it. He's your son-in-law. He's the most trustworthy man in your kingdom. He's your most faithful. And Saul said no. And therefore Saul had him executed. He and the entire Kohen family. So we learned something about what was really at the core of why Saul was so angry. It wasn't so much, it was a bit that he gave him bread, provisions, and the sword, but it was that he inquired of the Urim and Tumim on behalf of David as though he had the status of a king, because only such a person would be entitled to have that done on his behalf. Midrash Tanchuma Buber. There was a Rabbi Shlomo Buber, Solomon Buber, who discovered an ancient document, scrolls, a midrash known as Midrash Tanchuma, and it carries additional midrash here. And the part I brought for you is to teach you in Judaism's lesson about the incredible evil of gossiping, talking about other people, speaking ill of other people. It's something we just don't do. You don't talk badly about other people. Kosher lashon hara mishfichut damim. Speaking bad about other people, and by the way, that applies even if it's true, even if it's just gossip. You're not allowed to talk bad about people, unless the exception is if it's for a positive reason, a truly positive reason that God Almighty looking down from heaven would understand, because he knows your mind. He knows what you're thinking. He would say that's a good example. Someone wants to get married to Joe. And they come and they ask me, Rabbi, Joe is a member of your congregation or whatever. He's going to be proposing to me. I want to ask you, is he a solid guy? In every which way, I want to say good stuff. Let's say I happen to know that Joe is a crook. I have to find a way, if need be, explicitly, or if I could avoid it, whatever, I've got to let that person, I've got to let her know he's not what you think he is. This comes up. It's an example that the Chafetz Chaim, the rabbi who was regarded as Jewish history's greatest expert on the laws of evil talk, gives that as an example. Or someone wants to go into business. I want to go into business with someone. And he's a really nice guy and he's very successful. And the rabbi knows, or it doesn't have to be a rabbi. It could be somebody in his own family or somebody who knows him from God knows where. Is he a good guy to go into business with? And I've actually been privy to stuff like this, where I have learned certain very successful people in business are dishonest. I was rabbi of a congregation and someone else was talking Lashon Hara. Someone comes to me and gossips. And I said something nice about Joe Schmo. I said something very nice about him. He's very charitable. You know, he's a rich guy. He's charitable. He helps the congregation. And a particular person, very highly placed on the board of directors of the congregation, knew everybody, said, yeah, he's making donations with stolen money. He basically is a crook. He steals money from other people and he donates some of it to the shul and he keeps the rest. And he figures that makes his stolen money kosher. So I filed it in the back of my mind. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not true. I don't know, and I don't want to know, and I don't want to know because I don't have to know. Later on, someone wanted to go into business with him and asked me, "What do you know?" And I remember saying, "I advise you. I don't know for sure. There's some talk. Look into it more carefully." Look into it more carefully. I can't say he gets a clean bill of health, but maybe he does get a clean bill of health. So you've got to be careful. You can't speak bad about people, even if it's true. But if it's true for a good purpose, you most surely can say it. So here this Midrash is talking about it, the Tanchuma, that talking evil about people is like spilling blood. Shekol mi shehoreg. It's even worse than spilling blood because a killer kills only one person. But someone who speaks evil, gossip, tale-bearing, slander, horeg shlosha, he kills 3 people. He's killing himself for speaking Lashon Hara. In the eyes of God, the sin he's taking upon himself is enormous. He's killing the person he's talking about, ruining that person, maybe his career, maybe his reputation, maybe his family, maybe his community position. And he's ruining the person who's listening to the lie. Ha'omro, the one who speaks Lashon Hara is killing himself. The Hamaklablo, and the one who receives the Lashon Hara and accepts it unquestioningly is potentially hurting his own soul, the Hane'emar alav, and the one upon whom it's spoken. And the example they give is Doeg. Here in our story, Doeg Amar al Achimelech Lashon Hara. Doeg reported to King Shaul, Lashon Hara, evil talk about the high priest Kohen Gadol Achimelech. And as a result of that, look who got killed. First of all, V'neharag. Achimelech was killed. That's number 1. V'neharag Shaul. You know, I told you earlier, and of course everybody, it wasn't a spoiler alert, everybody knew that eventually Saul will die and David will become king. But what we don't know is that one of the reasons, the Talmud tells us, one of the reasons Saul died is that he killed the Kohanim, the Kohens of Nov. He gave the order to kill the 85 Kohanim, and the city. So by listening to Doeg's Lashon Hara, evil speech, and therefore accepting it and having the Kohanim and their city destroyed, it killed him. The Lashon Hara killed the Kohen, it killed Saul, and it killed Doeg. The Talmud tells us that Doeg lost his place in the world to come. He would have had a place perhaps in the world to come, and because of this, he lost Chaye Olam Haba. He lost his place in the world to come. That's the power of Lashon Hara, speaking evil about people. Now, I bring you this next Kohelet Rabbah, the next Midrash, very interesting Midrash. We have learned earlier, remember that the prophet Samuel, Shmuel Hanavi, do you remember earlier on, Shmuel Hanavi had commanded young Saul, you're going to go to war with the Amalekites, and God wants you to defeat the Amalekites and to kill them all out. Kill out everybody, all the Amalekites and all their animals, their sheep and their asses and their oxen, and their men and their women. You are to wipe out Amalek. This goes back to the Torah, where God says it is a commandment for all time to wipe out and eradicate all memory of Amalek. We nowadays have no idea who is Amalek. So we don't know who descends from that line. We can't just say, well, Hitler and the Nazis are Amalek. We don't know who the Amalekites are. But at that time they knew. And you will remember that the king, Shaul, spared the life of the Amalekite king Agag. And we learned all about that and how during the brief period Agag was in custody, he managed to impregnate somebody and thus bring about the restoration and the continued birth and repopulation of the Amalekites. And Saul took pity on the best cows and donkeys and sheep, and instead of killing them out, offered them for slaughter, etc. And he showed mercy. And so the Midrash brings out the following piece of psychology, fascinating. It says in the book of Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, Al tehit tzadik harbeh, don't be overly righteous. You should be righteous. You should be a tzaddik. But don't be like self-righteous. Don't be someone who virtue signals. Don't just be honestly righteous. Don't be excessively righteous. The al titchakem yoter. Don't be overly smart. Of course, you should be a genius, but don't be like, what do they say? Like he's too smart by half. And they explain, al titzadik harbeh, yoter mibora echa. What does that mean? You shouldn't be too righteous. Don't be more righteous. That the Midrash explains, Kohelet Rabbah, don't be more righteous than God, than your creator. So you could be very, very, very righteous, but don't be more righteous than God. Medaber b'Shaul. And the Midrash says it's the story of King Saul. As it says, Vayavo Shaul ad Ir Amalek, the story of Saul with the Amalekites. Rabbi Huna of Rabbi Benaiah Omer. Itchil mi dayanhu keneged bor'o. What ended up happening? The rabbi explains he decides to become a more merciful judge than God. Amar kach amar kadosh baruch hu lech v'kitan Amalek. Saul said, God commanded I should wipe out Amalek. Ima ashim chata'u hanashim mechatu. But I don't see why I have to kill out the women. V'ataf mechatu, and why I have to kill out the kids. V'habakar v'shor v'chamor mechatu. And I don't see what the cattle and donkeys and oxen did wrong. So he spared all of them. Yotzat bat kol v'yomra, a voice resonated out of heaven and spoke and said, it was heard, Al tehit tzadik harbeh yoter mibora acha. Don't be a greater tzaddik, more righteous than your creator. And they give the example, what ended up happening. The same incredibly, incredibly merciful, righteous person Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Omer, Rabbi Shimon, the son of Lakish, taught, Kol mishana asa Rachman bimkom achsari. It is a way of nature. People who are overly righteous to those who are evil, sof shana asa achsari bimkom Rachman. By the end of their lives, they will expose that they're so righteous to the evil, and yet they'll end up being evil to righteous people. Uminayan shana asa achsari bimkom Rachman. And where do we see an example of this in the Bible? That someone who, in one case, decided, I'm going to be more righteous than God. I'm that compassionate towards the evil people. Where do we see that later in his life in the Bible, the same person was evil to good people? King Saul, in our chapter tonight, what he did to the Kohanim, the Kohens, in the city of Kohens, a Nov, he called it Ficharav, Velote Nov Gezerah Shel Amalek. He ended up treating the Kohanim and Nov as though they had been the children of Amalek. He wiped them all out. The men, the women, the children, the donkeys, the sheep, the cows. That's what he ended up doing. Rabbanan Amrin Kol Mishna Sarachman B'Mkom Achsariv Sok Shemidara Din Pogatpo. And in the end, God punished him as well for that. Again, he died earlier than he otherwise would have died. And so as we wind down now for the day, I wanted to just bring home with you the extraordinary nature of how much more there is in the text beyond what the text itself has to show us. So in today's case, we did chapter 22, and it turns out we learned, and we wouldn't have known it but for the Midrash, we learned about the unique nature of inquiring of God. We learned about not only the Urim and Tumim, but that the High Kohen had actually inquired. We learned why that was regarded as an act of rebellion. We learned the principle that one who is overly righteous to the evil, to the wicked, later will be wicked to the righteous. We went on and we learned about how there are things in this world. God made a world that is perfect for his purposes. And while there may be things in this world that exist that are hard for us to accept or understand what's perfect about that, monsoons, typhoons, tsunamis, these things have purposes. He made them, he created this world with these things for reasons. Sometimes we will go an entire lifetime without knowing why he did it. After our lives, when we go before him in the world to come, we will find out the answers to a lot of secrets. And once in a while, like David, you actually find out in your own lifetime what that's all about. As David learned how mental illness saved his life. So these are some of the things, and we learned behind the scenes that the king of Moab killed out David's family when he departed. That's why David later goes to war with Moab, which raises the question, why did he trust them in the first place? And we learned because he descended from the Moabites. A really, really interesting set of teachings over and beyond the superficial text of chapter 22 that we actually went into pretty deeply. So thank you so much for being here. God willing, as I said, we will not be meeting next Tuesday. You'll get emails to that effect because of Wednesday night's Tisha B'Av program. And then we'll resume our Tuesday night class the following week. Thanks again for being here. And be well, and don't be overly righteous to the evil. Don't let them off the hook, because you don't want to be evil to the righteous. Bye-bye.